Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Bon Voyage Besties with your hosts, Rosa and Rachel. Our podcast is your go to spot for all things travel, empowerment, and real life moments that help you plan your next adventure. And today we have a super special guest with us, Valerie Stimac Bailey, the one lady band behind the travel blog, Valerie and Valise, as well as a few other awesome blogs. Valerie's expertise is all about travel in Alaska, the American West, and national parks. Having grown up in Alaska, she's passionate about inspiring others to book that unforgettable bucket list trip. So get ready for some amazing travel tips and inspiring stories. So welcome, Valerie, to the show.
Thanks for having me.
We're super excited. So I know when we first talked about having you on the show and talking all about Alaska, for me personally, I've never been to Alaska and it's one of my bucket list destinations to go to. So I'm super excited for this episode. I know when I was younger, I actually had a family member who moved to Alaska and I remember my cousins talking about, having to like walk to school. And in my mind, at this point, I think I was probably like 9 or maybe 10 years old. In my mind, all I can picture them, it's a Christmas Story where the kids are like bundled up from like head to toe, walking around, like they're kind of getting stuck on the pole because it's so freaking cold. But I'm curious to know, like, what is it really like living in Alaska and growing up in Alaska?
Well, I did stick my tongue to a pole. I can confirm that that movie is not exaggerating. It is not a good idea. So, kids, if you're listening or parents, please advise your children do not do that.
It
I
sounds
distinctly.
so painful.
It's really so. Yeah, without getting too deep in the weeds, I have scar tissue on that like thing that
No.
connects your tongue to the rest of your mouth because your instinct will be to pull back, and I did, and it like ripped it. So yeah, sorry to start on such a gruesome note. But Alaska is a wild place. That is the moral you should take away from it. Growing up, honestly, as a kid, kids, you don't have a wide diversity of perspective. Like we're all travelers. We understand there's lots of different ways of living. When you're a kid, just whatever you grow up as, whatever you know, and it doesn't seem weird. It didn't seem weird to me to grow up with like black bears going through the backyard on occasion or like watching for moose at the bus stop. That was just life. When I went away for college, I started to get a lot more perspective because I came down to what Alaskans would call the lower 48 to go to school. And there people would ask me about growing up in Alaska. And, I've seen the Northern Lights many times. That's a bucket list experience a lot of people want to do as well. And so they kind of like tag that up with going to Alaska. I got this realization that it was a pretty unusual place to grow up. And it's very fortunate, especially if you grew up in a family that's particularly active in the outdoors. So you can really do a lot of fun outdoor activities. My family was not super active in the camping and backpacking kind of way. My dad really enjoys hunting and fishing. So I did a lot of that growing up, which is very normal for Alaskans. But now as an adult, when I go back, I love to go hiking and get out and just enjoy the wilderness. So yeah, I definitely didn't realize how cool it was until I moved away, which is often how it goes when you move from one place to another.
Wow, that's amazing. I've just seen pictures of Alaska, the mountains, the glaciers, all of that. It just seems so magical. And I know a lot of my friends, it's a huge bucket list item. I personally got super excited when I saw that United was starting direct routes to Anchorage right from Newark. And I never realized, too, how far Alaska was from the lower 48. When I looked at the flight time, it said something like 8 hours, 8.5 hours. And I was just like, whoa, that's really, really far.
Yeah, I would say being someone who writes a lot about Alaska, and I work with a lot of people who are trying to plan trips, a lot of folks from like the East Coast or like even east of the Mississippi will often be trying to decide between Europe and Alaska because it's about the same travel time. And Alaska's quite expensive, so that I've heard several times, well, I could go to 2 or 3 European countries for the cost of Alaska. Absolutely, that's true. Just because it's such a big place and it is so far away.
Wow, yeah. And I remember too, like when I was trying to get a teaching job, briefly I actually looked at teaching positions in Alaska and I watched a lot of YouTube videos and especially like off of the main highway system up in Bush, Alaska, the YouTube videos would always show just how expensive items were in the grocery store and whatnot. So I totally believe it because you are a bit, removed.
Yeah, I think almost everybody has a Costco membership up there because it's one of the cheapest ways to get a lot of those essentials like eggs and milk at a more reasonable price. If you try and go to the normal grocery store, even growing up, I knew that it was expensive.
Yeah, so you're an expert on Alaska. I love your blog. I've been on it many a times. I personally want to go to Alaska one day. And you do help people plan their trips. So for someone planning their very first trip to Alaska, they've decided, I'm not going to worry about the cost. It's cool. I want to see mountains. I want to see bears. I want to see the northern lights. What are some must-see destinations or experiences that they shouldn't miss out on?
Sure. Well, first of all, if you don't have to worry about the cost, can you invite me? I'll be your private guide.
Dude,
Save me
seriously.
too.
Anyone out there like that, please give me money.
Yeah, sounds fun. No, if you, yeah, that sounds like the dream. But most people are budget conscious, and we can talk more about that if you do want to cover some budget conscious things. But the sort of the top highlights that most people want to experience kind of fall into two categories. And broadly speaking, it's either winter or summer activities. So I'll start with summer because I think it's somewhere in the range of like 80% of people who visit Alaska visit during the summer months, which is about early June through mid September. And then all the rest of the 20% of tourism, at least 10% of it happens in the real true winter months. And then the little like 5% on the transition season. So it's really a summer destination. The big one, I think the big one is Denali National Park. That's one of the top highlights that most people want to experience. They want to see the mountain. They want to see wildlife in the park. And speaking of wildlife, whale watching is often a really top activity that people want to do. There's lots of different areas in the state that you can do that because there's a lot of coastline in Alaska. And glaciers, you already mentioned glaciers. Glaciers is a huge one. That's another one that I didn't realize growing up was such a bucket list experience that people want to have, is just to see a glacier. But you can even go hiking on a glacier. You can do a helicopter ride and land on a glacier. You can go dog sledding on a glacier. Those are probably the big ones in the summer. And then the number one activity that takes people to Alaska in the winter is one I already mentioned, which is seeing the northern lights. When I was last in Alaska in the winter, there was a tour and they asked everybody on the tour what the thing that brought them to Alaska, what that was. And 100% of us, we all said the northern lights. So in the winter, big time seeing the northern lights, but you can also do dog sledding. You can do skiing, like downhill skiing or cross country skiing. You don't have as many of the wildlife viewing opportunities because most of the wildlife is less active or migrates during the winter, but there's still some opportunities. Yeah, that probably covers the bases. So I guess if I'm helping somebody plan, that's sort of the first question is like, which of those two buckets is your top priority? Because that's going to make a huge determination on when you go. You have to go when the things you want to do are available. You can't do an Aurora trip and do all the summer activities. It just doesn't work that way.
It sounds
Yeah,
so magical. I know when I went to Iceland, that was like my top bucket list was to see the Northern Lights. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to brave the cold and obviously go during the winter months in order for me to be able to see it. And it was so magical. So it's definitely highly recommend, like, if this is something that you want to do. And I don't know the cost. I've never really looked into going to Alaska, but like Rachel said, for some people, maybe cost is not a problem. But for somebody like myself, where I'm a little bit more budget conscious, what would you suggest as far as being kind of like a home base for someone going to Alaska for the first time that's still accessible to some of the national parks and some of the wildlife and things to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've touched on how Alaska is very big. It's inconceivably big if you haven't been there, just how far apart things are. I have a big Facebook group that people ask a lot of questions in, and we often get this one about, I want to just stay in one place and strike out and do things from that one place. If you are dead set on staying in one place, that place should be Anchorage because it's pretty centrally located and you can do day trips to do a fair number of these activities. You cannot do Denali National Park as a day trip. You would have to go to another part of the state and do at least one overnight. I'd recommend two in the Denali area. But if Denali isn't an essential, then you could just base yourself in Anchorage and go down to Seward and go to Homer and go to Whittier and go to Palmer and Matanuska Glacier and even maybe as far as Talkeetna during a single day trip. So Anchorage is really a great base in the summer. If you're going in the winter, I would actually start looking at Fairbanks first, which is the city that's a little bit further north, much better aurora viewing location without getting too deep into like geophysics and such. Fairbanks is just a better destination for seeing the aurora, but you can see it from Anchorage. And you have basically the same offering of Alaska winter experiences from both Anchorage or Fairbanks. So if, like most people, your driving force is seeing the northern lights, Fairbanks is generally a better way to start planning that trip.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've seen, like I said, Alaska on a map and it's ginormous. It's good that you can at least have these bases and do day trips out. I know very briefly my mom and I were looking at taking a trip to Alaska and she just got so overwhelmed because of how big it was and she gave up. So that's definitely good to know. How about hidden gems? Because we all hear about the big places in Alaska. Is there anywhere that you would recommend adding to a first time trip that's really special that may not get the same attention as the other spots?
So this is a tricky question because Rachel, it's funny. It's like you both know enough about Alaska that you're sort of teeing up my answers because as you mentioned, there's a road system. And so, well, first, let me back it up. There's two main ways to visit Alaska. One is on a cruise ship, which is going to go through Southeast, which is that little part with all the, inside passage nearer to Canada. And the rest is going to be like an independent land trip or a group trip through what's called South Central and Interior Alaska. That's the only part of the state, those three regions are the only part of the state you can easily visit. If you want to visit more remote areas, you're going to need to fly to them. So that would be like the Aleutian Islands or Nome or Kotzebue or Utqiagvik, which is way up north. You cannot get to those on the road system, really. So if you're driving, I would kind of encourage you to be open-minded about the fact that there's not a lot of places you can go that no one else will be in the summer, just because there's only so many places to go. Now, if you want to fly, take a smaller plane or a commercial plane out to a remote destination, one of the bush communities or something, you will escape the crowds, quote unquote. Within the road system, there are places that are more and less visited, I would say. But that doesn't mean there's anywhere I can tell you that you're going to really escape crowds and have like a true hidden gem. But the two most popular ones, and I agree, are great fun, would be Homer, which is on the Kenai Peninsula, drivable from Anchorage in a day. It'd be a long day to do it as a full day trip, but you can get there for sure in about half a day. And the other is Valdez, which is moving up on the coastline, kind of more along the Gulf of Alaska. And both of those are quite popular hidden gem type destinations because they don't receive very many cruise ships. So even though I mentioned that most cruise ships go through Southeast, they typically start and or end in Whittier or Seward, which are both right near Anchorage. And so that cruise flow of passengers, a lot of people, they do a cruise and then they do a land portion. So they might then go to Seward for a day or two, and then they go to Anchorage and then Denali and then Fairbanks, and then they fly home or something like that. Homer and Valdez, both of them get very few cruise ships, usually about 10 or fewer ships per season. And so you're much less likely to have a day when you're in one of those communities where there are cruise passengers versus every other community on the road system is likely to have cruise passengers when you're visiting during the summer.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know cruising is a big way to get around Alaska. And it makes sense if you're not receiving as many cruise ships per day, it's going to be a bit quieter. And personally, I've never been on a cruise. I feel like I'm the only traveler in existence who's never been on a cruise, but just out of curiosity, I know there's different like ethical issues with cruises with sustainability and whatnot. So is there any like particular cruise line that you would recommend, or would you recommend maybe staying away from cruising entirely, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, great question. This is something I'm actually really passionate about. The bigger the ship, broadly speaking, the more environmental impact it's going to have. Inversely, the smaller the ship, the lower you're going to have an impact, the less footprint you're going to leave. So there are actually sort of three categories of ship in Alaska, and the most environmentally sustainable option is called a small ship, and that's typically going to be somewhere in the range of about 30 to 50 passengers. There's a couple different companies that offer those size of cruises. There's one called Uncruise based out of Seattle. They do cruises in kind of other destinations as well, but they operate in Alaska in the summer. And then there's an Alaskan-based company called Alaskan Dream Cruises. I've cruised with both of those. And then there's another company, I think they're called American Cruise Lines. I haven't cruised with them. You can go a little bit like larger ships. So you might look at like a National Geographic or Lindblad. They do expedition ships as well. They tend to be pretty high price point, but they are known for their environmental sustainability focus in their operations as well. But I haven't cruised with them. So if you think you want to cruise, which I do recommend it. And I will say, I was anti-cruise. I was like, cruises aren't for me. And then I've done each different size category of ship at this point, and I really understand what different kinds of travelers and passengers they're targeting and what value they provide. So for example, with a family, those small ships don't even actually cater to kids, generally speaking. They're just not built for that kind of travel. So if you want to do a family trip or you want to do a multi-generational trip, maybe you're bringing your parents, they may not have the mobility necessarily to do the small ship and all the expedition activities. Those bigger ships can be a really great opportunity for them, especially as they're aging and they really want to see Alaska. So the market kind of serves everyone, which is sort of nice. But if you're specifically worried about ethical and environmental issues, smaller is always better.
That's definitely a good point to make, especially like you said, when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to travel, a lot of things that we can kind of do to kind of reduce our carbon footprint is very important, especially in this day and age with global warming and a lot of other, things going on in the world. We definitely have to make sure that we're contributing to helping with the environment. I know for myself, whenever we travel as a family of three. So those expenses can add up very, very easily. And we kind of have a little system. Every year, we always want like a big destination that we want to travel to. So we each kind of pick a different destination. I always try to like encourage my family to pick somewhere that I want to go to. So I always make sure to give them like the highlights and like all these amazing selling points. So for someone who's trying to convince their family or trying to convince someone to make that bucket list trip to Alaska, what do you think would be like the number one or like a top selling point that can kind of get, that trip going?
Ooh, that is tricky. Not that I would say everyone has Alaska on their bucket list. Like I can't imagine nobody has Alaska on their bucket list. So when I think of Alaska, the thing that I want people to really get and that I hope would give them that sense of inspiration from visiting, because really what you're trying to do when you're trying to convince your family you want to go somewhere is you're trying to sort of seed the memories they're going to come home with.
Mhm.
So the one that really gets me, Denali National Park is one of my favorite places on the planet. And what I love about Denali is that it is a very special and very pristine area of wilderness. Really, you don't encounter large swaths of wilderness in the lower 48. And so when you're in Denali, even when you're doing a bus tour, which is the only way you can visit the park after a certain point, there are points where you can step off at a designated stop on the bus and you just look out and everything you can see has never been modified by humans. That's not to say humans haven't been present, because there are lots of Alaska Native groups, but there's no roads, there's no power lines, there's no infrastructure, there's no buildings. You're just looking out over this huge area of pretty much pristine wilderness, and the silence, because they have very designated flight paths over the park. Like, it's a very well managed park. And then you just get this beautiful, clean, clear air and these smells of these plants that don't really grow in any other part of the United States. So you just get this incredible sensory experience that's very different than you can find even in our beautiful national parks down here in the lower 48. And that is, I kind of want people to just have that realization that like there are still these beautiful places, and there are lots of them in Alaska. Frankly, there's lots of opportunity to have that moment. Mine, I can usually think of in Denali, and just getting that perspective, how small we are, and that we have like a stewardship of these places too, that we need to be responsible for them. Because the only reason that Alaska is such a special place is that it was stewarded by Native Alaskans. Excuse me. It was stewarded by Alaska Natives for millennia. They made sure that they managed the resources and they protected the environment in such a way that we can now enjoy it today. And we have that obligation to do the same. So as you can tell, I get really connected to the place.
Sold.
Me too. I know.
You need to come to my family meeting.
I
I'm
know.
ready.
I know. I'm ready to invite you over. And I'm just like looking at all the traffic outside my apartment and just hearing you describe it. I'm just like, yeah, I'm sold. Get me the hell out of here. I would love it.
The interesting thing was I didn't really have that perspective growing up in Alaska, but I visited Alaska while I was in college, and I was dating someone at the time who was from the lower 48, and he came up and visited, and we went to Denali, and he commented, "I've never seen a place that didn't have roads before. As far as I can see, there's not a single road." And I had never really realized that when we visited Denali growing up frequently. And that sort of shifted my whole perspective on realizing just how much of Alaska is untouched and how special that is and why it needs to be protected.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely majestic. I know I'm 1,000% sold. And you're talking about all of this amazing, incredible nature. And you said yourself that you love going hiking when you go up to Alaska. Now, something I need to work on, especially when it's like a trip that's a bit more outdoorsy, I'm horrible at packing and preparing for that. I really am. I'm trying to be better. I want to visit more of the national parks, and just thinking about it, I'm just like, oh my gosh, what do I even bring? So what are some essentials that visitors should bring with them on their trip to Alaska to be prepared and to have a good time?
Great question. My brain went through my entire packing list very quickly. So the first thing I would encourage anybody who wants to pack light to look into is merino wool clothing. Super sustainably sourced, broadly speaking. I'm sure there are companies doing it poorly, but when you try and look for it, you'll find really great companies that are making really nice merino products. Merino is great also because it is a natural fiber. It is odor resistant. It's wrinkle resistant. It packs down really small. You can rewear it repeatedly. So when you look at my blog, if you have an eagle eye, you'll see how often I wear the same things over and over again. And that's usually multiple trips where I know exactly what to pack for Alaska. So merino is also nice because it layers really well for warmth. And layering is the key that every Alaskan will tell you is for staying comfortable. You want to be in layers so that if it gets nice, you can take a layer off. If it gets cold and rainy, you can put a layer on. So then transitioning, you always want to bring rain gear. You want to have a rain jacket and you want to have a pair of shoes that does not get your feet immediately wet. You also want a backup pair of shoes just in case you do get wet feet, but it rains a lot. So what people don't realize about Alaska is though they think of snow in the winter, that's actually the drier season. The wet season is the summer. And so you should be prepared for rain. You might get lucky and have 10 days without any rain at all, but it's just as likely you could have 10 days straight of rain. So always being prepared for rain. And then the last ones that I would say are actually kind of funny. You want to bring sunglasses and an eye mask. because the summer sun is up long hours and very bright and high in the sky. Also, when it does go down, it might not fully get dark at night. So most hotels, most nice hotels, you're going to have blackout curtains, but it's always just a good idea to have a little eye mask in case you're staying somewhere where there's like some leakage around the windows. It could be daylight, like the videos that we're showing you. It can be that level of light at 1 a.m. You can't really sleep through that if you're not used to it. So bringing an eye mask is just one of those little ones that I say, just always make sure you pack it. You'll never regret having it if you need it.
Yeah. It reminds me of Iceland. I've been to Iceland in the winter and the summer, and I brought my eye mask because I just knew, like, luckily we had the blackout curtains, but there's no way I would have been able to sleep if I didn't have it. And then, like, vice versa, in the winter, I didn't realize how much the darkness was going to mess with me. Like, I can't speak for Alaska, but in Iceland, the sun wouldn't come up till like 11 and then it would be gone again at 3. And I was just so sluggish and so tired. I couldn't get out of bed. And it was really, really challenging. So if you're not used to it, it can be rough.
Both directions.
Yeah, no, that
Yes.
definitely takes some adjusting to. But that's a good recommendation right there with the eye mask, because that's something I necessarily wouldn't think of, but definitely good to kind of keep that in mind.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to ask, if someone's planning their first trip to Alaska, I always get like stuck on how many days to spend whenever I go on a destination. Usually what I do, and I don't know if I recommend this for everyone, is just seeing what like plane tickets are the cheapest on Google Flights and then going with those dates and then filling in the blanks. But say someone's planning their first trip to Alaska, how long do you recommend that they stay?
Yeah, that's a great question. We were discussing earlier the people who have no budget, and then the answer is as long as you can, as long as you have money for. But perhaps a shorter and more helpful answer would be the minimum number of days I think you need to really get a little sample of Alaska is 5. So if you have less than 5 days, if you're like trying to optimize PTO or you've got a long holiday weekend you're trying to make the most of, between the flying time and just how long it takes to get between places, 5 days is the barest minimum that you can really enjoy it. Now, if you are going to Alaska already, let's say for a work conference or something like that, and you're only going to have 2 or 3 more days, you're going to be based in Anchorage or Fairbanks or Juneau, whatever, you can make the most of that. That's not to say like don't extend a couple days if you can, but if you're planning a trip just to go explore Alaska, 5's the minimum. 7's nice, 10's great. 12 really starts to open up the full range of what's available in South Central and Interior. And we're kind of just talking about that South Central and Interior region because that's really what most independent travelers do. It's a little bit more complicated if you want to try and do Southeast Alaska without doing a cruise. We could go into that, but it's kind of like a little bit of a rabbit hole. So if you're trying to do that, like reach out and we'll talk about it. I'll explain why. But 12 days, you can really do the whole road system and have a really nice trip with 12 days. So 12 to 14 is sort of the upper limit that most people are between 7 and 12 to 14.
So that's completely doable, especially like for myself. Whenever I travel, I do have a certain amount of PTO days that I can utilize through the year. I do work a standard like 9 to 5 job. So definitely kind of being conscious that it's a doable trip, because the maximum normally that we go anywhere would be 2 weeks. So 12 days would be like ideal. And I feel like we can then cover a lot of places. So I know you mentioned Denali being one of the top places to visit when going, but what's something that's a little bit more off the beaten path, but still as beautiful, that maybe doesn't get as crowded, especially during the summer months?
Yeah. So this goes to show how big Alaska is, that I grew up there and I've been back more than a dozen times and I still have not been to this national park. And after this summer, it may be the only Alaskan park I haven't been to. So if you are looking for another fantastic, less crowded opportunity, it would be Wrangell St. Elias National Park. So Wrangell St. Elias National Park is twice the size of Denali. It's the largest national park in the system. It is accessible only by, I believe, 2 roads. Both are gravel. Both you have to have a special rental car to be able to take on the road. So if you want to try and visit Wrangell St. Elias, make sure that you review your rental terms because a lot of the companies will not allow you to drive out into that park. But if you do figure out all of the logistics, you reach these communities that are sort of deep in the heart of that park that see very, very few visitors, mostly people who are keen on not having a crowd and not having a big hoopla. I have not been to McCarthy, which is the main community within Wrangell St. Elias. So I can't speak from direct experience, seen lots of photos. I've talked to lots of folks who work out there. It sounds like it's about as far as you can get from everywhere, if that
That
makes
sounds pretty
sense.
cool. Yeah.
That's amazing. That sounds amazing. I'm kind of a cautious driver. I get a little nervous when I'm driving and don't know where I'm going. So when you're talking about the gravel road and having a special rental car, I was just like, I could feel my anxiety. I'd be like, oh my God, my rental car would be totally wrecked.
Yeah.
And that's a good tip too, looking into the rental car, because I was actually having a conversation with someone and they did mention that with Alaska, when you're renting a car, you have to be very specific, because with some rental companies, there are restrictions, I guess, depending on like the roads that you're going and things like that. So that's definitely a good tip for a first timer as well.
Yeah, if I don't know if you can find it via Google very easily, but I do have an article it's called the 7 restricted Alaskan roads you can't drive in rental cars. There are rental cars you can take. It's just you need to make sure that you've rented from the right company with the right contract terms. But it's a nice list that kind of runs through the roads that if you are looking at a map and you're saying, oh, that's that highway, I need to make sure I get a car that allows me to do that. And one of the things that I've learned from traveling back to Alaska often is when I'm renting a car and I want to do something a little bit different, that's my first question before I'll pick up the phone and call the rental agency and say, I want to do X in my car. Do you allow me to do that? And usually they will either say, yes, it's going to be an upcharge, or no, or, oh, that's fine. Thanks for letting us know. So we know if you don't turn up where your car is. Like, because that's the reality, is the reason that there are rules about where you can drive and what you can do in different rental cars in Alaska is there's not a lot of services. So if you get yourself into trouble, there's no AAA. I mean, there is, but like on the McCarthy Road, there's no AAA. I had a rental that I took from Turo. I got a flat tire on a main road. I had to get it towed 29 miles, which doesn't sound very far, $400.
Wow.
Yes. And then I had to pay for a new tire, which was a fantastic, weird experience. It was a guy who just collects tires in his front yard. So he has every kind of tire you might need, and you just pay him cash for it, and he puts the tire on your car. And like, that's how it works when you have problems sometimes. So there's a reason the rental agencies are doing that. It doesn't mean you can't do things. You just have to make sure you rent with a company that's going to have priced that risk into their price and has the infrastructure to support you if you get yourself into trouble.
Do you know of maybe any like tour companies that kind of organize group trips that you would recommend within Alaska? Because I know, like Rachel said, even for myself, I'm comfortable driving in most places, but the idea of being in a remote area where we can have car trouble and not have any service, like, freaks me out a little bit. So maybe I'm like,
just
maybe
cry in the back seat. I mean, just like crying with like the black bears and being like, oh, I'm screwed.
I was like, maybe I need a tour guide.
I might be like hardened from having been, because I'm just like, okay, I know I can solve this. Like, I can figure it out. There's an ATM somewhere.
Quality.
Yeah.
Quality.
So there are
I would just sit in my car and cry.
No, you'll be fine. You'll be
bear,
fine.
hopefully no bears come up.
You'll be fine. But there are tour companies for sure. It kind of, again, it's much like cruise ships. There's a range of experiences. So if you're doing a cruise, you can often add on a land tour that's organized by the cruise company. Especially, I think it's Holland America and Princess. And I actually used to work for Holland America that way back in the day. They do land-based tours. So that's really nice if you're planning a cruise and you're listening. Take a look. If you want to extend your trip another, I think it's between 5 and 10 days on average, you can just add that on call your reservations agent or whatever and just add that. It's really neat. There are independent tour companies. I've actually done one. They do the kind of like the big coach with like 50 to 60 people. That company was called John Hall's Alaska. They're based out of Minnesota, but they've operated in Alaska for, I think, at least 50 years at this point. Really great company. If you're looking for smaller, there are absolutely smaller companies. One that I highly recommend is woman-owned and Alaska-based, called Salmonberry Tours. They operate out of Anchorage, and they do all kinds of tour operations. So actually, this is not a promo spot, but I'm currently chatting with them about leading a tour myself. So they even work with creators like us to organize group tours for our communities. So I'm really excited to offer that to my folks and see if anyone wants to travel with me.
Oh my gosh, I would travel with you. Yeah.
I get a flat tire on the road by myself.
Bon voyage besties on the road. Yeah, so like they do, and they can do from like anywhere from like a small group, like if you were a couple families, let's say you've got like 6 or 8 or 10 people, they can do like a private charter kind of thing, or you can do what I'm doing, which is anywhere between 8 and 12 people that are going to be, independent travelers kind of lumping together, and we're going to do a tour all together. So there's a range, just like there is for cruises, and you can kind of find what fits your budget and your travel preferences too.
Yeah, that last tour company sounds amazing, especially if you are, say, like I've done a lot of trips solo, and I just like love the smaller group experience because you can connect with people more easily. And I think it would be like really fun in a destination like Alaska.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think that in my case, from my community, and this is not to say if you're listening, you're like, ooh, I think it's going to be a lot of return people, because a lot of people find me and use my site to then plan their trip. So they've already been to Alaska, but they're like, oh, I could go back in the winter and go with Valerie. And that's like a different angle. So these littler companies, especially Alaskan based ones, they can do anything. Like they can, if you have the budget, they can plan anything you want to do.
Very cool.
Yeah, that sounds so fun. How much do these tours usually cost? Like just like a range? Because I know people are thinking about like cost when it comes to planning their trips. I know I make jokes about running up my credit cards, but I do try to be a little conscientious. I try.
Yes. Alaska, I think I said it near the top. Alaska's not cheap, and you just kind of have to be prepared. I'll tell a little story about why my mentality is sort of laissez-faire about visiting Alaska. Broadly speaking, to answer your question, it's I would say you need to plan for somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 per person for a week to 10 days. But that's sort of like you can do it for cheaper. Like that's sort of me knowing just broadly how people like to travel and what they like to do. And you don't want to just, what I think is if it's the way you like to travel, that's fine. But like you don't want to just go and not do anything. Like you're going to Alaska to do stuff. Now, there are more and less expensive things you can do, like hiking, usually not going to cost much, or like maybe it's $5 for parking or something. That's a way you can cut down. But if you want to do whale watching and you want to do a flight seeing tour and you want to do a dog sledding tour, like those are going to add up quickly. Also, accommodation in Alaska is very expensive. Tours sort of bundle it all together and you get this sticker shock of this like highline price that you're paying right up front. But I've been tracking my own expenses on trips for so long now that I know that even traveling independently, it's usually not much cheaper. And having the logistics of like a guide and all the meals included and your luggage taken care of every morning, like that's got value. And it's often much better priced in the group tour than it is when you do it yourself. So just something to keep in mind. The funny story that I wanted to share is that when I was working for Holland America as a young person in college, I was working up in Denali National Park, probably why I love it so much. I spent a whole summer there. And part of my job was selling tours. This older traveler woman came into our office and she kind of approached the desk in the way, if you've ever worked in customer service, you're like bracing yourself, right? Like, oh no. But so she's walking in and she's got a cane and she walks up to the desk and she kind of leaned on it and she said, "You young people, credit cards exist for a reason. Travel when you're young because when you get old, you can't do anything fun anymore." She wanted to go whitewater rafting and she wasn't physically able to. And not that now,
Aw.
caveat, please be financially responsible, manage your finances, pay your credit cards on time. Frankly, don't give credit cards money. Don't give them money. Pay your bill. But credit is a valuable tool that you can use to make trips happen. So that's sort of the lesson that I took from her is if you have something you really want to do anywhere in the world, do it when you're young and you can actually do the thing you want to do, because if you wait, you might not get the opportunity. And that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
really true. I always tell myself that too whenever I'm feeling like a little bit guilty. So if I have a slightly bigger balance on the card and I have trips coming up, I just tell myself, I don't know what's going to happen in even 5 years, 10 years, and money can always come back. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like it, but I always tell myself, hey, that soccer stipend is going to hit again in November and the cycle's going to reset itself. Wouldn't you rather do something fun and have those amazing memories than just like hoarding onto this? Now, I'm not a financial advisor. Listeners, don't take that fully to heart. I'm just saying, though, if you want to have no regrets, I'm just saying.
I will say this is a
All
very
your money, but spend
this
some
is
of
a
it.
very like millennial mindset that we all have. I think it's from where we came up that if they joke we're the YOLO destiny, or just they joke we're the YOLO generation. And it's kind of because we sort of learned really young that like money comes and goes, but we only get to go through this one time. And there's things you want to do and you should do them while you can and not risk not getting the opportunity to. Because frankly, like right now, as we're recording this, the economy is quite uncertain. So some people are really changing the way they think. I mean, this bringing it back, like people are changing their Alaska plans to try and be more responsible. They're postponing their Alaska trips. And that also happened during the pandemic. For years, I had people coming back saying, I wanted to go to Alaska with this family member and they passed away during the pandemic, or they are no longer physically able. And I wish we had gone. And it's like, not to say, again, manage your finances responsibly, make sure you have some savings, make sure you've got some investments, diversify, but also credit is a tool. That's sort of my takeaways. Credit's a tool that you can use to help unlock the life you want responsibly.
I love that.
Be
I
like
love that.
me. Leave your family at home and go by yourself and save.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
That does it too.
discount.
Fun versus
Yep.
so terrible. No, I don't think that they would, forgive me if I went to Alaska and came back with all these amazing memories and like photos and experiences and left them behind. I would be in big trouble. But I know we talk a lot about Alaska and I'm 100% sold. I'm like, all right, I definitely need to make it happen. Start, kind of thinking budget wise, ways that I can save and start planning for the trip. But I know aside from Alaska, you're also pretty active exploring some of the American West and other national parks. So what other places do you recommend? And maybe so for like solo travelers that are looking to kind of get out there and experience a little bit more.
Gosh, that is a very big question. Well, oh man.
We
Okay,
can break it down.
so if I were going solo, one trip that I would, if I hadn't done it already, I would look at doing is a Utah National Parks road trip. Utah, that I don't mean to overgeneralize, but talking about travel, you kind of have to make generalizations. Very friendly place to travel, tourism oriented. They have the mighty five incredible parks, all very different, but actually pretty geographically close. So you could do a road trip to the 5 Utah parks. And I think we would broadly feel pretty safe, pretty supported with infrastructure for tourism, even as a solo traveler, even as a solo female traveler. And my pro tip where my brain just went sideways was if you're going to do that trip, make sure you give the extra day or two to go into Nevada and visit Nevada's only national park. It's called Great Basin. It's one of my 5 favorite parks. And that's a great, if you want a hidden gem, Great Basin is a hidden gem park. It is very, very condensed, a few really beautiful attractions, a very small community that's super welcoming, right kind of at the gateway of the park, easily accessible from Utah, from Las Vegas, from Salt Lake. So a kind of fun addition if you're going to do a national parks road trip. I spent a lot of time in the Pacific Northwest and in California. I've lived in both of those places as well. The other area that I personally love and would gladly spend, probably I'd move there if there were a way to make it work for my family, is the Oregon coast down into the California coast, that northern California and Oregon coast where the redwoods are still, there's sort of this nice blend where the redwoods and the Northern California beauty meets the Pacific Northwest, sort of between I would say like Mendocino on the California end, and then all the way up, I mean, all of Oregon, but all the way up maybe to like Newport in Oregon. That coast is a gorgeous drive, lots of really interesting things to see, plenty of small communities that are well equipped for tourists, for visitors. And I think you would probably feel quite safe as a solo traveler. Like, I don't think there's any conditions where you would be out of your depth or feel like you didn't have resources if you needed them.
Yeah,
So
that
many
sounds like
great
a beautiful
places.
trip. Yeah, I was actually looking at the Oregon coast today when I should have been lesson planning. So I've been like on such a national parks kick recently, just looking at all the parks and the different road trips that I would love to do someday. So, for travelers looking to get out into nature, whether it's Alaska or the American West, any of the national parks, what are your top tips that you would give to them, especially for somebody who's kind of a newbie when it comes to getting outside? You know, like me, I'm not really much of a hiker.
Yeah, if you are starting to get into hiking, I would highly recommend checking out All Trails. Specifically, I think it's All Trails Pro or All Trails Plus. And the reason I'm advising that is that you can use that extra set of features to have GPS on your phone tracking you as you hike. So if you were to get into a situation, you would actually have a GPS like locator. Your phone basically acts more like a beacon. I don't know if there's an emergency support like alert system to it, but it would just be something sort of valuable that you could be like, hey, family, I'm going hiking in this park. Like, here's my planned trail, and I expect to be back by this time. And then there would be even more specific data with your phone. Just thinking about how we do hear still about people either going missing or getting injured in parks, and having that extra data in our 21st century is pretty neat. The other thing I would say that I've learned is to pay attention to elevation. So that's a tricky one that always gets me because I'm pretty sensitive to it. And then I find out when I'm going somewhere, like, oh, that's at 7,000 feet. And I need to be prepared for elevation sickness because I get sick at about like 6 to 7,000. A lot of the parks are at different elevations, high elevations that you might not expect. So Great Basin, I already mentioned that one. The coolest hike in that park is at about 10,000 feet. So you need to be prepared for all of the changes that your body's going to undergo. Even if you're only there for a couple hours to do that hike's going to kick your butt much differently than it would if you were doing that same strenuousness of hike at a lower elevation. I'm actually headed to Bryce Canyon in just a few weeks. That park's at 7,000 to 8,000 feet. So I gotta be prepared that my cardiovascular system is going to be behaving differently than it would normally because I'm more sensitive. I think those are probably 2 of my main ones that I've learned sort of the hard way.
Yeah, elevation sickness is no joke. Like, I was in France with my mom over the summer, and we went to see Mount Blanc, and we did this cable car ride up the mountain, and she felt so sick and was like, I have to wait at a lower altitude, you go and do it. And the same thing happened in Switzerland in the Swiss Alps. She, like, the altitude sickness just got her. It didn't like bother me, and that was just from taking like a cable car up the mountain. It wasn't even hiking. So it's something to like really keep in mind, because sometimes people just don't know. Like, I think I said this on another episode. When I was in Scottsdale a few years ago, I was glad I checked the weather because I was planning a major day trip to the Grand Canyon, and it was well worth it. But I didn't realize that there'd be snow there in the winter. And I looked at the elevation. I was like, oh my God. I'm like, it's 75 in Scottsdale, but it's 40 degrees in the Grand Canyon. So it can be, very surprising if you don't know what to expect.
Yep. My pro tip for elevation sickness is orange juice. It's one of those things that if I know I'm going somewhere, I just grab a bottle of it because it's good for you anyway. When you're traveling, just get a little extra vitamin C. But I believe, I don't have like a source that I can put to, but I believe the science is that there's something in orange juice that helps with your blood oxidation levels. So you just process the oxygen you're taking in a little bit better, which if you're sensitive like me, and maybe it's placebo effect, but hey, here's my placebo effect for everyone listening. I just have a glass of orange juice a couple times a day and I tend to not have any problems. But that's at, that 7 to 10,000 window. I have never been above 10,000 feet for an extended period of time. So I have no idea if I were to try and go to Peru, how my body would perform. Travel's
Yeah, no,
always
that
learning
happened.
too.
Yeah, that happened to us when we went to Cusco. We flew from New Jersey to Lima, then Lima straight to Cusco. Like halfway through the first day in Cusco, we were just walking, not even like on a flat surface, and I was like out of breath. I was like, oh my gosh! I was like, I feel like I just ran a marathon. And then, sure enough, it hit me. I was like, yep, the elevation is getting to me. And by the
Mhm.
time we went to get something to eat, and like my partner was like, oh, I'm gonna have like a local beer. I was like, yeah, I don't think I should be drinking. I was like, I should stay just hydrated, drink water, because I started to feel my body was feeling a little bit off. I remember we did like a walking tour, and there was these two, like a young group. They were from Switzerland, so they were kind of used to, dealing with the elevation. And I told the tour guy, I was like, listen, we're going all the way to the top. I'll make it there eventually. If not, I'll be sitting right here on this stoop. Just go on without me. But it really did. It took a turn. And like you said, being prepared for these things, because sometimes we don't think about that. We're just thinking like, okay, we're going to a different destination, but you never know how your body is going to be adjusting, and always preparing and like listening to your body too. Because if like certain times you can't really push yourself to an extreme either. So
Mhm.
that's definitely, something to watch out for, especially if you're traveling by yourself.
Mhm.
I know, like with Peru too, I think don't like some of the hotels even have oxygen tanks because people get like so out of breath.
For some of the tours, yeah, they when you sign the disclaimer, they even have like an extra added fee if you need like oxygen. They even gave us like cocoa tea, and they're like, "Oh, this is supposed to be good for you." And same like you, Valerie. I was like, "Oh yeah, it's doing something," but I think it was just like all mental, because like 20 minutes after walking, I was like, "Yeah, no, I'm feeling like crap. This is definitely not working." So definitely being prepared is a big one.
Yeah, so on the more positive side, so when it comes to planning a trip, like say in Alaska or the American West, have you ever, as a frequent traveler to these places, ever had an experience that was really transformable or really memorable that you still think about till this day?
That's a tricky one. Didn't see that one on the list.
It's like
I
a
think about it.
curveball.
It's gonna take a second.
Bah.
Well, the first one that pops into my head is when I swore off hostels, and this is an
Oh, let's
Alaska
hear
one.
it. Let's
Good.
hear it.
Okay, so I am not anti-hostel, broadly speaking. I understand that they have a great value for certain kinds of travelers, and especially in destinations where there's a lot of variety of accommodation. It's really great to have a very budget-friendly option to make travel more accessible for more people. But in Alaska, there's not that much variety. So typically there is, if there is a hostel, there is only one, and it is not to the standard that we may all think of when we think of a great European hostel. And so I did this trip. It was one of my first trips back to Alaska when I started traveling as a creator. And I did all hostels. And for the first hostel, it was like the classic, people went out to the bar and stayed out too late and were throwing up. And there was some hanky panky going on. And that's the hostel number one. And then hostel number two, I was in the women's only dorm. And there was a woman who, I don't know what she was using as an alarm, but she didn't know how to turn it off. And so it was like every 9 minutes for like an hour and a half, everyone in the room. And then her whole group got up and turned the lights on. And it was still like before 7 o'clock in the morning. I was like, first of all, if you need to get up at a certain time, set your alarm, get out of bed. And so I'm just like standing in the, shared shower, trying not to look too close to the towel. I'm like, I'm done. I'm done with hostels. I'm done. In Alaska, I don't think I've stayed in a hostel since then. That's not to say I wouldn't. I just am a little more discerning about which places I might stay in a hostel. That's bringing up the transformation you were talking about.
So
It
if you're
is.
looking, guys, to swear off hostels, go to Alaska. That'll
Yeah,
cure
I
it.
don't know if any of those hostels are even still open. Like that's the kind of situation we have for hostels in Alaska. There actually is, I will say, I heard when T-Bex was just up in Anchorage, the travel blogger conference in September of 2024, there is a new hostel in downtown Anchorage, and I heard some really nice things from a couple people at the conference who said they were looking for something budget friendly, so they were trying it, and they reported positively. That doesn't mean swear off all hostels forever. But again, like Anchorage, sorry, detour. Anchorage is the biggest city, so like there's a lot more accommodation options. You also have to perform to a higher standard to stay in business. Smaller communities don't have that same market pressure, frankly, to get deep in the weeds. Most of my transformations have been like learning the hard way,
It's
which is not.
important.
I mean, it is.
It's yeah.
So the same year I got the flat tire in Alaska, I learned my limits by taking a car into a ghost town in Nevada near Great Basin and getting it nose first in a ditch.
Oof, no,
No.
Yep.
Oh man.
With an impending snowstorm, and I
no.
luckily I
Girl.
had service and I had battery for my phone, and I was basically doing the like emergency, like, here's my location, here's where I'm headed, calling a tow truck and then hiking. So I'm like texting my husband, like, here's where the car is, here's where I'm trying to get to, I'm hiking out, I'm going to call a tow truck as soon as I can get someone on the phone, and then in the event that I can't get a tow truck, I will be hitchhiking in this direction to this town.
Oh my
Luckily
gosh.
It's amazing.
At least
it
you're
kind
able
of
to like react very quickly though. So that's good.
Yeah, this must be like the having gotten into a couple hairy situations in Alaska and just learned how to like not freak out. I don't know, but it actually worked out as smoothly as it possibly could have, and the snowstorm didn't end up being as bad as it could have been. It definitely put the kibosh on the rest of my afternoon's plans because I lost several hours, but I had to hike 5 miles out to the main road to go meet the tow truck to then ride back up into the mountains to get him to pull my car out. So I learned on that instance to just be a little bit more listening to that like quiet voice because I was definitely like, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. But when you're saying I'll be fine, you're talking to something in your head that's telling you maybe you're beyond your depth here. So I think that's probably another really good one. We have good instincts, especially if you travel. Well, if you travel ever, you just gain them from traveling. So trust them. Just trust them.
Yeah, don't
Yeah,
ignore that
don't
little
end up in a
voice in
ditch.
your head. No, because it's so true, especially as a solo traveler. Every time that little voice in my head has been like, hey, this may not be the best idea, that little voice has always been right. So it's definitely something that you learn to listen to when you're traveling by yourself, because when you travel by yourself, it's just you relying on you, and you want to listen to that voice because otherwise bad things happen. Ask me
Yeah,
how I know.
you either listen or you learn. Those are your two choices. It's up to you how you want to do it, the easy way or the hard way. I like to learn the hard way, apparently.
You and me both.
And that's funny, especially as a parent, you're always trying telling your kids like, don't do this, don't do that. And then, you're just like, yep, talking from experience, kiddo. So that's always fun. So but I'm curious to know. So I know early in the episode you mentioned one of the services that you provide if someone is looking specifically to maybe plan a trip to Alaska. This is one of the services that they can find, well, they can find more information on your blog, but this is also one of the services that you're able to offer is kind of curating travel adventures for someone. But if somebody was interested in kind of doing something like that, would they go directly onto your blog, or how can they find more information about that?
Yes. So I've offered trip planning by me on and off over the years. I'm not currently offering it, but I do basically, I have two fantastic options that I offer people. One is another creator like us, this is now a big part of her business. And she's also very knowledgeable, has lived and worked in Alaska for years. And then I have a local agency in Alaska. So I basically am like a lead generation service at this point. But that's not to say I don't help people. So if you send me an email with some notes or something, I'm off. If it's quick enough, I'm going to kind of like jot you back some quick thoughts. If you wanted that information, the easiest way to find it is just to go to my website, which is valeriebelize.com. And then there in the top menu, there's Alaska. And if you click that or you hover over it, there's so much. But like there's a trip planning thing that pops down in the menu. You could click that and that tells more about what I can offer. That's sort of the best starting place. The other one is if you want free advice, which who doesn't, we all want to save money in this economy. My Facebook group, which is called Alaska Travel Tips, it's over 100,000 people. That's a really great way to even just do some research. We don't approve very many questions, to be honest. We only approve about 25% because most questions have already been asked. So we just kind of like refer people back to searching and going through the group. But if you have an itinerary that you want feedback on, that group is a fantastic resource. Like we get questions like that every day and we let those ones in because everyone's itinerary is really unique. And, you get a bunch of people to give you some inputs. It may make you feel overwhelmed again, because that's kind of the common feeling when you're planning a trip to Alaska, but you'll get a ton of input to then, incorporate on your own discretion, basically.
It's
That's pretty
really
cool
awesome.
though.
100,000 people. That's really, really cool. I can't imagine moderating a group of that size. You must have like such patience. Just the thought gives me hives.
I have three incredible co-moderators, co-admins. They are all Alaskans. They live up there. They volunteer. I mean, I cannot sing their praises enough that they handle the majority of what happens through that group. And they just really are passionate about making sure, like me, like making sure people get really good, accurate information and that the community is very valuable. And so that, they're willing to do that to support. the local tourism economy, right? Because if we give bad advice, people still come. Like because people still, just because you wrote a bad article about Paris, not you, either of you, but like someone writes a bad article about Paris doesn't deter a person from going. It just means when they get on the ground, they're more disappointed and frustrated. So our goal is to try and prevent that from happening by making sure people are really knowledgeable and well set up with the right information and the right plans before they even get there.
No, that's a pretty good resource. Thank you for sharing that.
Pleasure.
I definitely know where I'm going to go when I plan a trip to Alaska because it's going to be a matter of when and not if. Because, yeah, I would totally burn 5K on a trip to Alaska.
Yeah, my next trip, the trip I have on the books, which is after this podcast is scheduled to be released, is in June of 2025. And it is currently between 5 and 6K. I'm doing a very different trip than I've ever done before. I'm headed up to the Arctic. So I'm going to Nome and Kotzebue and Nuktiavik. And then I'm also doing
Cool.
the two national parks up there, which is Kobuk Valley and Gates of the Arctic. And I'm doing Katmai, which is a fly out from Anchorage, and possibly also Lake Clark, which is another fly out from Anchorage. So I've got a lot of things that have driven that cost up, but those are also a lot of the things that other people like to do when they visit. So it's kind of makes sense that my budget has gotten big.
It sounds amazing, though. Sounds worth every penny.
I hope so.
Well,
I'm really excited.
I'm excited for you. We definitely want to hear all about it. And I want to see all the beautiful pictures and hear about the plane rides, of course, because everyone knows how I feel about like flying in small planes.
I'm flying with the company that had that accident a few months ago. Aviation incidents typically happen because something unexpected goes wrong. And what they found out about that crash is that they'd made an error and they'd loaded too much on the plane. Like they know better, right? I don't feel any less confidence in the company. They have learned, unfortunately. Wait, we were just talking about learning the hard way.
Yeah, learning the hard way, right? Yeah.
So I'm fully confident flying with them. I'm confident that they are going to be probably one of the safest airlines in the world for several more years at least, because they don't ever want anything like this to happen again.
Yeah, they're definitely going to want to overcompensate by making sure they're triple checking, dotting all their I's and crossing their T's. So, but
And I
I'm
know
super
I would
excited
still
to
go.
see. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and that's one thing we kind of talk about in another episode. It's like not letting your fear. I mean, it's human nature. Sometimes we do get scared, and it is important to listen to your instinct, but not letting fear kind of hold you back from, going on these epic adventures because, like we said before, life is short. Like, you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And if you're able to do it, just take the leap, be adventurous, try it, or make for some epic memories later on in life. So we're super excited. I can't wait to kind of follow you along on that adventure and kind of see how that plays out. So looking forward to it for you. I'll live vicariously through you for now until I save up to go to Alaska.
Yep, sounds good. I'll be here when you need me. Happy to help plan.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank
You'll
you.
for sure be getting an email from me like, Valerie, help me plan a trip to Alaska. I want to
Help your mom out of her overwhelm. That is the number one word that I hear.
Yes, please do. Because we talked about it briefly. And it was when I noticed that there was a direct flight from Newark to Alaska. And she was just like, every time I try to plan Alaska, I just get overwhelmed by all the options with the cruise companies. I get overwhelmed because I'm not sure what tours to take. Because she's like me. She'll drive, but I feel like Alaska would be like a little scary for her to drive. So she just gets overwhelmed by all the options and then, kind of gives up. So anything to alleviate that stress would be awesome because I think it would be such a cool mother-daughter trip to go to Alaska. What could be better? You're surrounded by glaciers and wildlife, and the weather is very appealing too, especially because I can only travel in the summer and I don't like a lot of heat and humidity. It's perfect.
It is perfect.
Pretty awesome. So I guess to kind of wrap up, you gave so many amazing suggestions and advice, so we definitely appreciate that. But as a traveler and travel blogger, what's your personal motto when it comes to travel and exploration?
Well, I definitely am strongly informed by the woman with her credit card advice.
You and me both, my friend.
That's a great question. What is my motto?
I know Rachel's YOLO.
That's kind of, I'm like,
Did you just look at my stories recently? Oh my God, I'm going to declare bankruptcy. It's fine.
I guess, I'm trying to think of a simple way to explain the way I feel about it. I think my philosophy of travel is informed by the woman's credit card advice and Anthony Bourdain, which is that
My favorite.
a lot of, yeah. Rachel knows how much Bourdain is also my favorite. We don't travel just for travel's sake. We travel because we know we're transformed by it. And I desperately believe that we need more transformation in this world. We need people to go places and see things they don't understand and know and be changed by that because it's almost always for the better. And I think broadly speaking, globally, what we're seeing is a lot of people afraid of one another. And Anthony Bourdain showed us that there was no need to fear. Even in the most dangerous places he ever traveled, the people were just trying to live just like we're trying to live. Alaska doesn't necessarily seem like a place that's going to open your mind. Like there are places where you're going to just experience a completely different culture and a completely different way of life and different foods and different language and all of that, like deep immersion. But it is different. It is different than the rest of the United States. It's different than anywhere else in the world. And in some ways, that makes it a great opportunity because it's got all this appeal, right? We've been talking about, oh, why Alaska's so great. So people want to go there and then they get there and it's just different enough to remind them that the world is still a really interesting, exciting place to be and that they shouldn't be afraid of the people that they meet along the way. And that I think is probably why I keep traveling. It's not, I don't know that I would necessarily as like an influence, like I do it to inspire others to do it. Like that's not my vibe, but it's like, I'm going to do it and create the best resources so that when you feel ready, you know you can trust that I have laid the groundwork for you to be able to go do it and have a great experience too.
That's beautiful.
It's
I was like, I
really
got
beautiful.
chills. Oh my
I
gosh.
know, because I was actually thinking all this week about the different people I've met on solo trips, like along the way, and some have like been longer, long distance friendships that I keep up to this day. Others have been like friendships for like a moment, but they've all really impacted me and changed me a lot. And I wouldn't like exchange that for anything. And I think it's made me a better person, a kinder person, a more empathetic person, a more open-minded person. And I think it's just so important that we get out there and connect with one another, especially like now. It's so critically important. Yeah, I love that. Let's all get out and travel, folks. The money will come back.
Yeah. And like we didn't really dive into it, but like there are ways to visit anywhere in the world within the means that you have. You may have to wait a couple years, you may have to make some sacrifices of things that you wanted to do, but anyone can visit Alaska. I would actually say harder for me to plan than a budget trip is a trip for someone under the age of 25 who can't rent a vehicle. Like that logistic is actually more challenging to overcome. It's not impossible. There's lots of infrastructure now. It didn't used to be there 10 years ago when I started, but money we can work with. Like we can always figure something out. If you can get the airfare and you can find a place to sleep, hey, I know a hostel in Anchorage. Like we can make it work.
It's so true. Like my first solo trip to Scotland, I couldn't get a full-time teaching job because New Jersey was so saturated and the budgets were in the toilet. And I saved the money I made subbing to go to Scotland and stayed in hostels. And I was like, like going to the grocery store, having picnics, doing hikes. But I had the most amazing time and met the greatest people for not all that much money. And it's like I wouldn't give up those memories for anything. So it's certainly possible to do.
Like you said, planning ahead is definitely key. So if it's definitely something that you want to do, like I said, for myself, it's something that I want to do with my family. And normally we take like one pretty epic trip once every couple of years because my daughter's currently in college. So that's not cheap either. So now we're a little bit more conscious of our budget. So we're like, okay, every other year we can now, as a family, make sure that we're saving and doing what we want to do to make sure that we're making like these lasting and epic memories. So if it's something that you definitely want, then it's completely doable. And like you said, Valerie, I mean, like once you have a budget in place or kind of have an idea, at least like a starting point, at least anything is doable. So really excited. So thank you again for sharing all these amazing tips.
You're very welcome. As you can tell, I can go on.
Yeah, we absolutely love it, and we'll definitely have you on the podcast again. Like, there's so much about Alaska that I want to learn about, and the American West too, because really I've spent most of my time, on the East Coast of the United States, and I want to, see more of our beautiful national parks, and I really want to see Alaska one day. So, for everybody who's listening, our audience, where can they find your blog, if you want to reiterate that, as well as your social media handles?
Sure. Yeah. So my blog is Valerie and Valise. It is Valerie, the normal spelling, VALISE.com, ValerieValise.com. And then my social media handles are the same. They're at Valerie Valise or Valerie and Valise on Facebook. Probably, I'll probably say the show notes are probably the easiest place to find it because spelling all of those letters is kind of a handful. The other thing I wanted to just really quickly touch on, because we were just talking about budgets, is that if you are listening to this in the next few days, I'm actually hosting what is called the Bucket List Bundle. So me and a dozen other creators are offering free products to different bucket list destinations. And mine about Alaska is actually for helping you calculate how much your trip was likely to cost, come up with a savings plan, and then it has I have an ebook with a bunch of tips to help you save money that are specific to Alaska travel. But there's also a national park freebie in that bundle. So it's bucketlistbundle.com. It runs through the 22nd of April. So if you're listening in real time, that's sort of your little free bonus. Like you literally just got to put in your email and you get to go sign up for all of those free travel resources. And then you'll be inspired trying to choose between Antarctica and Africa and Alaska. Sorry. for making
You'll
it
have
hard.
a bunch of beautiful options, and then you'll just have to save for all of them.
Yep. And my calculator will at least help for Alaska.
Take like a sabbatical from work or something. Be like, I
Oh
need to
my
go find
gosh, yes.
myself by traveling the world. See you in 2030.
Sounds good, actually.
That sounds like a plan to me. It's definitely something I would love to do.
Thank you. No, we'll definitely make sure to link that in the show notes because I think, like I said, at least for myself, it's definitely something that I see myself doing in the near future. So having these tools available, it's going to help me tremendously. So thank you so much for sharing that with us and our audience. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so definitely check that out, guys, and definitely follow Valerie on all the social media handles. If you want to plan a trip to Alaska, also join that wonderful Facebook group because it sounds like an incredible destination and you will have your questions answered, your itinerary looked at, because it's always really useful to have a second pair of eyes on that itinerary if there's one thing I've learned from traveling. So, yeah, plan that trip to Alaska. YOLO. Don't worry about the credit cards. They'll take care of themselves. And we love you guys, and we will see you next time. Till then, bon voyage, besties. We love you guys. Take care.
Bye. Thanks, Valerie.